Netflix has a new, monstrous story to tell. In 1950s Wisconsin, Ed Gein lived quietly on a decaying farm, hiding a house of horrors so gruesome it would redefine the American nightmare. Driven by isolation, psychosis, and an all-consuming obsession with his mother, he committed crimes that would haunt Hollywood for decades. The third and most harrowing installment of Ryan Murphy and Ian Brennan's anthology series. Watch Monster, the Ed Gein story, October 3rd, only on Netflix.
Well, we were not prepared for this. The venue is full. However, the mission is bigger than the room. You can still join us. Due to the incredible uptake, our Responding to the Rebirth conference will now be live streamed. Book your online pass now at rebirthconference.net. You may not be in the room, but you can still be part of the response from anywhere in the world on Saturday, the 22nd of November. On the live stream, you'll get full access to all keynote sessions, panels and interviews with guests including John Lennox, Paul Kingsnorth, Elizabeth Oldfield and Al Gordon. You can take part in the Q&A. You'll get to take home recordings of all of the sessions and get a front row seat to what God is doing. A rebirth is happening. Let's respond together wherever we are. Book your live stream pass at rebirthconference.net.
By 1979, only about 500 people from a Muslim background came to Christ. And then the hardline regime came and all the missionaries were kicked out. But somehow, in the midst of all that, it's gone the opposite way. Most estimates would say that there's about 1 million people in Iran, possibly more, that have come to Christ.
In these days, when I came out from prison, people, they look at me and they said, Farshid, you were faithful to the Lord. You stood for the Lord. I just look at them and say thank you, but this is not the reality. The reality is he was faithful to me. He stood for me.
So many testimonies, stories of forgiveness and restoration. Then there's stories of healing. Jesus is presenting himself alive to people in Iran.
And I was thinking, how God knew me. I was full of motherly love. And again, I could start to worship him. I could start to pray. It was thanksgiving on my mouth and my lips. And, it was, God healed in that situation my broken heart.
What looked absolutely impossible has now become one of the greatest moves of God on the earth today.
Hello and welcome back to the surprising rebirth of belief in God with me, Justin Brierley. Today, our show zooms out from what's just going on in the West to see where surprising rebirth is happening in other parts of the world as well. This is in some ways a part 2 to last week's show on engaging Islam in the West, as I'll be sharing some remarkable stories from the country of Iran, which has been undergoing a Christian revolution for the past couple of decades, seeing extraordinary numbers of Muslims encountering Christ. My guest is David Yeghnazar of ELAM, a ministry that seeks to strengthen and expand the church in the Iran region and beyond. And we'll also be hearing the testimonies of Iranian Christians living out their faith under intense persecution. Just before we dive in, a quick reminder that you can help me bring this show to more people when you become a monthly supporter of my work. Silver supporters get early access to new episodes as well as bonus content, and gold supporters also get signed copies of both my books and a monthly catch-up call with me if you'd like it. The links are with the show notes. Well, Iran has been in our headlines this year as tensions have escalated between the Islamic regime there and the State of Israel. Many people are familiar with the modern history of Iran. At one time, it was a relatively tolerant and somewhat westernized country until the Shah was deposed and overthrown in 1979 by a revolution that saw the hardline cleric Ayatollah Khomeini take power and establish an authoritarian Islamic regime that continues up to the present day. However, fewer people are aware of another revolution that's been happening in Iran in recent decades. Despite intense persecution, Iran has the fastest growing church in the world, as a Christian revolution has seen hundreds of thousands of Iranians come to faith in Christ, alongside some extraordinary stories of dreams, miracles, and great courage. Well, during the course of today's show, we'll hear the journeys of two Iranian Christians living out their faith in extraordinarily difficult circumstances, Farshid and Magda. Those are from interviews that they've shared with ELAM. But we begin the conversation with David Yeghnazar of ELAM. So welcome to Season 2, Episode 23 of The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, Iran's Christian Revolution. David, welcome along.
Thank you so much. Great to be here with you. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Well, I'm looking forward to it too. Want to find out a bit about your story, the story of what's happening in Iran, which, as far as I can tell, is very exciting, though obviously it's been in our headlines for all the wrong reasons, unfortunately, recently with the instability in that region at the moment. But we'll talk about all of that. Before we get to any of it, ELAM, tell us about ELAM. What is it and what do you do there?
So ELAM is a ministry that was set up back in 1990. So we're celebrating 35 years this year. And it was set up with this idea that there was a sense that God was doing something new in Iran, that there was early indications of a new openness of the Iranian people to the message of Jesus Christ. And so started with training 6 students from Iran. Actually, my father started it. It began in our home. 6 students came from Iran to our home in England. I couldn't train them in Iran, so they came here. I lost my bedroom for 6 months. The classroom was the kitchen. And it's one of those great stories of God's faithfulness over the years. So we're now able to train, to equip, to send the gospel into the Iran region. And we've really seen incredible work of God and the transformation of so many lives. As you said in the introduction, it's just a remarkable story. It's a beautiful story, very, very faith-inspiring, encouraging. So glad to share it with people today.
Well, we'll hear the story of Iran in a moment and what's been happening in terms of Christian faith there. What about your own story? What's your relationship, I suppose, to Iran yourself as well, David?
So my father is Iranian. My mother's British. So my dad, actually my grandfather came to Christ in the 1930s in Iran. And he really was somebody who had no faith in God, but he found himself in a church one day and he just sensed a voice from heaven saying, "Follow me, young man." And so he did. It was really a powerful encounter for him. And then he became known as a spiritual father in the modern Iranian church. David Yeghnazar was his name. I was, my parents met at Bible college in India. And so my mother's British, but was in India. They went back to Iran. I was born in 1974, which was just 5 years before the revolution. And we ended up, my dad was actually with the Bible Society. We moved to the Philippines. We were in Lebanon. I came to the UK when I was 9 years old. But actually, the week before we moved from Lebanon to the UK, I had a personal encounter with the Lord. It was just very, I was only 9, but it was so powerful, such a deep moment in my life where, as a couple of friends prayed with me, I just sensed God's presence in a very powerful way and felt like I belonged to Him. Later on at school and then university, obviously went through all the questions and trying to understand things. And but all I can say is I found that the Lord has been so faithful, so kind and gracious to me over the years. So it's my privilege to follow Him. But also, I've seen the story of Iran's church unfold in my lifetime, and it's a great story. So, so many evidences of God's grace and work in so many different ways.
Well, let's hear that story now. So just in what you've already mentioned with your grandfather's stories, it's evident that there has been a Christian presence for some time in Iran. But would you tell us a little bit about the background of the country, its history, how Christianity has sort of, been involved in the country over the years. And yeah, some of that recent history, as you say, the Iranian Revolution is what most people know Iran as now. But perhaps you could sketch out the sort of a sense of before and after as well.
Yeah, that's so many people, as you say, would remember the revolution that took place in 1979. In terms of the modern influence of the church, the first missionaries went from the UK in 1812. A guy called Henry Martin went in 1812, translated the Bible into Persian at that time. He saw only one person come to Christ. There were some missionaries went from Scotland at the end of the 1800s. The Anglicans went in the 1920s, I believe. Then there were other mission groups that came. By 1979, these were some incredible people, beautiful, they really loved, they served. But by 1979, when the revolution took place, there were only about 500 Christians from a Muslim background in Iran. So all those years of hard work, investment, and my grandfather and the role that they played, they prayed every day without fail for over 4 years at one point in the 1950s. But by 1979, only about 500 people from a Muslim background came to Christ. And then the hardline regime came, and all the missionaries were kicked out. There was a tiny church, and people felt like that small church might wither away and die. But somehow, in the midst of all that, it's gone the opposite way. Iranian people have become very open to the message of Christ, to the gospel. And the church began to grow in different ways, which we'll talk about. But today, most estimates would say that there's about 1 million people in Iran, possibly more, that have come to Christ, made the decision somehow to make Jesus Lord of their lives. And so it is an incredible story of what looked absolutely impossible has now become one of the greatest moves of God on the earth today.
So what's happened in just 45 years, essentially, to go from about 500 to around 1 million Christians from a Muslim background? What is it something to do with the regime that's been in power all that time? And yeah, what are the kind of influences that you would say have shaped the way that Iranians are now seeming to be so open to the gospel?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's many things that have come together, but when the regime took place, when the new regime came in, they came with a lot of promises, a lot of hope. People thought this was going to be a great new glorious day for the country. And what happened? You have essentially a theocracy in Iran. And so the country is run by the religious rulers. And over the years, a few things have happened. First of all, most of the people have become very disillusioned with the regime, and therefore with the Islamic institution there, the whole way that everything is done. So people have their faith in Islam, their faith in their religion has become dislocated, a lot of disillusionment. But the second thing that's happened is there has been a courageous church that has been willing to really witness, to share their faith. And they have, I remember being in Iran in 1985 myself. I was 11 years old. It was just a few years after the revolution. And so I remember we were going from my grandfather's house to this little tiny church. And at that time, the symbols of the regime were everywhere. I remember seeing signs, death to America, death to Israel. My sister, who was only 2 years older than me, was forced to wear the head covering. And, as an 11-year-old, you're thinking, this is, how is the church even going to survive here? But I remember going into that little church, and I just had this memory of the Christians praying with all their heart, just crying out to God, bring salvation, bring hope, empower us to share the message. My grandfather was arms raised, the tears running down his cheek. And I remember thinking, can God answer their prayer? But in those meetings, it was almost like they saw another story. So they went for it, whatever they could, the tiny little things they could do. And God has blessed it. So these two things combined, the disillusionment and the courage of the church and the determination for the church to say, we have a message of hope. We have a message that can bring salvation. We have a message that can bring transformation. We're going to go for it, even though there's great persecution.
Tell us a bit about that persecution. What is allowed and what is not allowed when it comes to Christianity and the church in Iran officially?
So before the revolution, there were some overground churches that were established through the missions over those years. So there was the Anglican Church, Presbyterians, the Assemblies of God, and a few other groups, the Brethren. As the revolution went on, all those churches have been closed down. There is an ethnic minority church there. There's the Armenians and the Assyrians. They are allowed to exist. The Orthodox Armenians, Orthodox Assyrians, they are allowed to exist as long as they have their services and they keep themselves in their own languages. So as soon as you start speaking Persian in church services, that means you're actually trying to reach Muslims. So you're not allowed to have services or gatherings in Persian, Farsi, the same thing. So the Armenians and the Assyrians are there, but the Persian language church has been severely persecuted. Some pastors were killed, hundreds and hundreds of people arrested, lots of pressure on church services, any gatherings, people are not allowed to gather together. The Bible Society was closed down in 1990, so the Bible essentially banned, and all of these things put together makes it look, oh, how is the church even going to survive? But somehow it's gone the other way.
And how do people come to faith under those circumstances then, given that you're officially not allowed to do any kind of evangelism in Farsi, in the people's mother tongue? How are Iranians being reached and becoming Christians? What are the sort of stories you're hearing? What are the experiences of the churches as they try to, I suppose, work alongside these restrictions and persecution?
So, I mean, I think for your listeners, what's really interesting, because I've listened to the podcast myself, and just this idea of the Lord God is real, God is working, He is, and Jesus, it says in Acts chapter 1, verse 3, that Jesus presented Himself alive to the disciples. And what I would say generally is Jesus is presenting Himself alive to people in Iran. And it is in so many different ways. Sometimes it's just through reading the scripture. So the Bible was banned, but the prayer was, Lord, flood Iran with the word of God. So there have been different projects, and people can learn about that on our website or other places as well. But essentially, we've distributed millions of scriptures in Iran. And sometimes it's just simply reading the Bible that people have said, wow, this is true. Whether they read the Sermon on the Mount, and they just right there's some kind of revelation or understanding. But then also it's the transformation of lives. So many testimonies where impossible situations, people, stories of forgiveness and restoration. Then there's stories of healing, and so many different kinds of healings and miracles. I'll tell you one story. This is just from last week. Can I tell a story? And because I think this is just from last week. So, what's interesting, Justin, is that we're not just talking about 3 or 4 testimonies from, 1976 or, and hanging. It's every week these stories are happening. And by the way, I'm excited because I'm hearing more and more of these stories in the UK. We can talk about that later. I'd love to hear about that. But last week, I heard this testimony of a lady, and we can just call her Mariam. But she was a new Christian herself, and she had found out that she was adopted when she was 20 years old, and then she was working through that as a new believer. But she felt like she wanted to share the gospel with other people, and her pastor, the leader of her local fellowship, encouraged her to share. She was a bit afraid, but she had a New Testament to give out to somebody. And so she put this New Testament in her handbag and was praying all day long, Lord, who can I give this to? She ends up in a little grocery store in the evening, and she's praying, and she sees a 7-year-old girl who's staring at her, and so she talks to the girl and the mother, and so she feels like, maybe I'll give this New Testament to this lady in the grocery store. So she says, can I give you a gift? It's the gospel of Jesus Christ. And this is how many people share their faith in Iran. They say, I've met Jesus. He's changed my life. Here's a New Testament. You can read about him. You can meet him too. So the lady who receives the New Testament is absolutely stunned. And she says, are you giving me this today? And Mariam says, yes. Why are you so shocked? She said, this morning I was online, and she'd gone to our actual website, our Persian language website, and put a request in for a New Testament. She said, can you send me a New Testament in the morning? And she said, I can't believe that you're giving it to me today, right here. And so right there, she gets it, and Mariam meets with her. She gives her life to Christ. But the interesting thing about it is that she notices that there's something about the 7-year-old she's praying for. About a month later, she discovers that this new believer, the girl, is actually also adopted. And the mother has been worried for a long time. How do I tell her about the adoption? And, just these little stories, these connections, divine connections in a grocery store. And that's just one of many, many stories. It's a fresh one from just last week. It shows that the word of God is powerful, but Christians have the courage to speak. But ultimately, God is writing the story, connecting things. And when people hear these kinds of stories, their faith is built. And there's so many other stories that I could tell about dreams, visions, and the thing is, it's not just one time, it's happening over and over and over again.
Hi friends, have you heard about the new video series just out that responds to the rebirth in faith we're seeing in the West? The Encounter series is filmed across the globe, is beautifully produced, and is exactly what's needed at this time. Encounter explores the lives of people that Jesus met then and now, and is hosted by my friend Carl Fays. It was a pleasure to be interviewed on the series and to join other guests like Pete Gregg, Paul Kingsnorth, Martin Shaw, Heather Tomlinson, Mike Bird, and Lynn Cohick, all names you may recognise from the surprising rebirth of belief in God. If you're looking for a resource for today's cultural moment, can I recommend that you go to encounterseries.com.au. You won't be disappointed. That's encounterseries.com.au. My conversation with David Yeghnazar continues shortly. For now, I want to introduce you to Farshid, a key leader within the early underground house church movement inside Iran, and the story of the day that he and other leaders of his church were arrested and put in prison. For Farshid, that included spending almost a year in solitary confinement. Despite the incredible hardship he underwent, as you'll hear, Farshid exhibits a contagious joy. But he begins here by telling the story of how he became a Christian.
1995, my older brother was in such a difficult situation, not only him, but also the whole family. And, but he was struggling with alcohol, with depression, with different things. But when he got saved, what the Bible talks about being born again was very clear in his life. And that through that point, I started to read the New Testament for the first time in my life. I haven't seen in my own language before. And actually, I was reading in private. I didn't want my brother knows I'm interested about that. And as long as I was reading that wonderful book, two things really hit my heart. One was, for the first time in my life, I was seeing God as a father. And I remember in those times I didn't have a good relationship with my dad. So I was thinking and imagining, is it really possible the creator of heaven and earth become my dad? And also the other thing was, when I was reading the New Testament for the first time in my life, it was like a familiar voice. I don't know how, but it's like, it's so close to my heart. So finally, I gave my life to the Lord in 1996. If I want to tell you how was life, how was my Christian life, I can tell you, it started with a great joy. After 1 month, about over 1 month, finally they trusted us and they led us to attend the church service. In that time we had about 300 church members, and over 200 of them, they were from Muslim background. I remember I only had New Testament, and I really wanted to have the whole Bible. Only the old believers, they had old Bibles, and I was looking at them. Maybe 4 months or 5 months, finally, my teacher came to me and said, Farshid, now we have 4 Bibles from abroad, and you can have one of that. But you need to pay 4,000 2 months for that. At least let's say something about $10, for example, for that. But I had no money because I was not receiving any money from my parents. And I remember my auntie, she was giving me on that time something like $1 per month.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, okay, you mean for 10 months I have to save my money and not going to the higher school and anything, but I really wanted to have that Bible. So I went to my friends, actually to my Muslim friends, because I didn't have any Christian friends on that time. And I asked them, can you give me $1? Can you give me 50 cents? And I remember I got a big bunch of money and I brought it to my teacher and I said, now let me have that Bible. Yeah, and I cannot tell you how excited I was. I remember some nights I was hugging my Bible, kissing my Bible. Even when I was sleeping, I put my Bible very close to my pillow. So it was really like someone who found a treasure.
Yeah.
And this is how the early days started. I was attending all the prayer meeting, and very soon I realized Lord called me to serve the children. And I had a heart for children. So at the early of 1997, I started to serving the kids. And for over 11 years, then I was teaching teenagers. Then I became worship leader. Some of our friends, they were under the persecution at that time. And it was also, we knew it as a part of our Christian life from the very beginning. They were calling by the intelligence service. Yeah. Even the pastor was calling by them. Some people, they kept someone in prison for few days, or someone for few months, or a brother for 3 years. Actually, from the very early days of my Christian life, I knew it could happen to me as well. Because these things, they were not just stories. If something was happening to one of our friends, it didn't surprise us. Like Peter said, don't be surprised because the fire is among you. Church was under the persecution for over years and years. But I remember when I can say about from maybe 2002, 2003, church was really under the pressure more than before. You are Christian and you want to be a Christian, that's fine, but you're not allowed to evangelism. Mm-hmm. You are not allowed to accept any new person in the church. I remember when the earthquake happened in Bam, I went to serve the Lord in Bam for 1 year in 2004. End of 2004, I went to England in ELAM ministry, in ELAM college. And in 2005, I came back to Iran. Actually, I had an opportunity to stay in England and serve the Lord in England. I had a good offer. But I said, no, I want to go back to Iran because how many pastors we have in Iran? So in 2005, when I came back to Iran, at the beginning, I had no idea about the underground church. I went back to the above ground church, but when I saw they don't let the Muslim people come in, I got upset because I said I was a Muslim one day. And many people like me, and church belongs to the Lord, even though the authority is not happy about that. So that's why I have decided to come to my home, and I started with 2 families. We started at the end of summer 2005. But in 5 years, we planted 48 churches in 20 cities of Iran.
The churches that Farshid helped to plant remained intentionally small, forming new fellowships whenever they reached 30 or 40 people to avoid being discovered by the authorities. But one fateful day, that all changed.
On that night, we had a Christmas service, and because it was late, I didn't go home. So we stayed in my mother-in-law's house But then on 26th of December, 6 in the morning, I woke up with the voice of the strangers. I heard a voice. I was sleeping and I heard a voice. A guy is telling someone else, go away, go away. If you cooperate, nothing going to happen to you. And then I opened my eyes and I saw 5 big men, and their face shows they are a very radical Muslims.
Yeah.
They came to arrest my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law because they were church leader. I was like the senior pastor, but they came to arrest the other pastors. It was 6 in the morning until 8. So they didn't realize who am I. Just they asked me, what are you doing here? And I told them, I'm a guest. Took my cell phone. And I had the double SIM card telephone. And in one of them, I had all the telephone number of the church members. So when I realized after 2 hours, they didn't understand who am I told them, okay, can I take my children to the school? My daughter was 7 years old on that time, and my son was 2 years old. And then the guy told me, yeah, I think you can go. I said, okay, would you please give me my telephone? And he said, which one? I said, this one. So I took my phone, and also I took the hands of my daughter. I hugged my son, and I saw my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law as a church leader in handcuff, and they were taking them to prison. Wow. And they were looking at me like begging with their eyes that, where are you going? Or I didn't say anything, and I jumped into my car and I tried to find the public phone and call the other leaders to tell them hide themselves or run away. But no one answered. I received a phone call to my phone from my home. But who is calling me? I'm here. My wife is in my mother-in-law's home, and someone is calling me, and people, they were calling me from intelligence service, people who were inside my home, and they said, come home. We want to ask you some questions.
Yeah.
And I told them, I will think about that. And honestly, I said, I will think about that. And I was driving, I was looking myself at the mirror, and I was thinking, what shall I do? Shall I go to the border, or shall I take my kids? So finally I have decided, okay, I will go and I will turn myself in to the authority. When Jesus said the good shepherd lay his life for the sheep. But also in that part it says, but the one who is the higher, when he sees the wolf is coming, he'll leave the flag and run away.
Yeah.
And I remember it was like I was driving and I was asking myself, am I a hired or I am a shepherd? And so I remember we arrived to my daughter's school, and I remember I came out of my car. I bowed down on my knees before her on the street, and I told her, her name is Rosanna. I said, Rosanna, just I want to tell you that loves you so much, but probably we are not going to see each other for a while. And I remember my daughter, she was 7 at that time, and she hugged me so tightly, maybe for over 10 seconds, just she was pushing me to herself, and she didn't say even one single word, nothing. And then I separate her from my arms, and then I told her, because we were late, and I told her, if your teacher asks you why you came late, just tell her something happened to my dad. She looked at me and she said, Dad, you go. You don't worry about me, just go. That was the last things I heard from her, and I didn't see her for 10 years and 3 weeks until last January. Yeah. Wow. The second time I saw her, she was a young lady, 17 years old. Yeah. But that was the last time I saw her. And then I remember I came to my son's kindergarten. My son was less than 2 years old. I was kissing him from the head and face and hand because I didn't know, am I going to see him again or not? And as you know, till today, after 11 years, unfortunately, I haven't seen him yet. Now he is 13. I gave him to his teacher, and I remember I had about 17, 18 New Testament in the back of my car. I laid those New Testament in the corner of somewhere. I lay my hands on that and I said, Lord, whoever is thirsty, let them find your word. And then I came back to the same home that I came out.
Okay.
And as soon as they saw me, they hit me, punched me in the face. They put me on the ground. They put handcuffs on me.
Wow.
Yeah, they were so angry when they saw me. And I remember they were calling to the chief to tell them, hey, we catch him. I wanted to tell them, hey, you didn't catch me. I came by myself. I want to be very honest with you. It was definitely from the Lord, but I was in such a peace. Unbelievable.
Other leaders from the church had been arrested, but Farshid underwent interrogation as the authorities tried to locate more of them, including his co-worker, Cyrus.
Where is Cyrus? I said, I don't know. Again, this guy, my first interrogator, came forward another 1 meter. And then he asked me for the second time, where is Cyrus? And when I said, I don't know for the second time, the other guy who was standing on my left, and I couldn't see him actually, he punched me in the face. And I fell down and I went to the library because I was sitting on a chair with the wheels, with a handcuff. Yeah. They stand me up and they put me on the chair again. And for the third time, he asked me, where is Cyrus? I didn't know at that time that Cyrus hiding himself or running away. And he was leading one of our key churches in Mashhad. And Mashhad is a very, very religious city in Iran. And also he was in charge for all of our New Testament. He had the key for the warehouse and all this stuff. And I was trying to protect him. So for the third time, when he asked me, where is Cyrus? I said, I think he's in Mashhad. So after that, they took everything, like any Christian book, any Bible, laptop, and all these things, and they put blindfold on me, and they put me in the back of a car. I couldn't see because I wasn't blindfold, but when I heard the iron door sound, I realized, okay, we should be in prison.
Farshid was put into a cell measuring just a few square meters and spent the following 361 days in solitary confinement with almost no communication with friends or family.
I was so worried, actually, especially for my family. And finally, they lied to me and they said, we brought your wife here too. So tell us where we should leave your children. After a few months, maybe about 6 months, 7 months, I lost my hope of even being survived. So I wrote my last words. So yeah, I lost hope, at least I can say 2 times when I was in solitary. Yeah. And finally, I remember I was shouting, okay, you are saying I did something wrong. Send me to the court and execute me or do whatever you want to do. Or send me to prison. Yeah. Here is not a place for keeping people for a long time. And I remember 2 days after that, on 21st of December 2011. Yeah. So finally, they sent me to the real prison. And when they were sending me to the real prison, wow, I had such a joy in my heart. 2 other brothers, they were already arrested and they were in that prison. When inside, one of them, he hugged me and said, Brother Farsh, so happy to see you. We were praying for you. They arrested after me, but they didn't keep them that long in that solitary. So they took me to the room. They gave me clothes. You know, it was like heaven for me because I could be with people. Toilet was available 24 hours. Shower was available. Fresh air from morning until evening, until 5, 6 in the p.m. So yeah, again, I was there for a couple of months, and after 14 months, finally they sent me to the court. Then that guy gave me 6 years. So finally, after 5 years, on 21st of December, I came out. But honestly, when in these days, when I came out from prison, people, they look at me and they said, Farshid, you were faithful to the Lord. You stood for the Lord. I just look at them and say, thank you. But if I had a chance to tell them, I will tell them, this is not the reality. The reality is he was faithful to me. He stood for me. He didn't let me to feel loneliness. This is all he has done for me, but I don't know why people, they see it. It's like I did something. I don't like it. Honestly. And also people, they were praying for me in a way that I never experienced receiving this much prayer in my life. I remember one day when I was in solitary, for no reason, I was experiencing such a joy. And it was like a song repeating in my heart, a song that I never heard it before. And I started to dance in my solitary and sing without voice. I remember I was dancing and singing without any voice. But the guard outside, because they heard some activity, they thought I'm doing something or trying to escape. And one of them, he opened the door very quickly, for example, to see what I'm doing. And because I was dancing and I was in such a joy, I look at him with a big smile on my face and I said, "Sir, how are you?" Then he looked at me and said, "It seems you are better than me." That was a good confession, actually, because I was in solitary, he was out of that. Every night was not like that, but that night I was like this, and maybe someone was praying for me. That's why I see God's grace and presence and His faithfulness much, much greater than my part. You know, it's like I'm looking at the painting with the colorful things, which is God's part and people of God's part, because millions of people were praying for me. So I cannot my color in that painting. Do you know what I'm saying? Because the other colors, God's color and people's color, is much brighter than my part.
An extraordinary story. The link to the full interview with Farshid on ELAM's Jesus Speaks Farsi podcast is available with today's show info. Coming up next, I'm continuing my interview with David Yeghnazar on how, amidst the persecution, amazing God-ordained encounters are taking place in Iran. I have heard, there have been lots of stories circulating of Muslims coming to faith because of supernatural encounters, visions, especially of Jesus. How common how much have you seen that, I suppose, in your own experience in Iran of Muslims encountering Jesus, essentially even before they've necessarily met a Christian or been to church and so on?
So I'm probably, like most people, I don't easily believe all these things. Is it true? Is it not true? I mean, it's just our nature, isn't it? But I have heard so many stories, and I've seen the change in the people that of visions and dreams. And so one, which is a beautiful story, is a couple that I know who've actually been trained through our ministry. These are good people. They had come to a point in their lives before they met Christ where they'd lost everything. A married couple, lost everything, forced to leave actually as refugees to a different country, and nothing was going right for a long time. And so one night they went to bed saying, how about we end it? Basically, they'd been talking about this, but they said, this will be our last night. We end it together tomorrow. They were going to commit suicide. And so, but that night they both had the same dream about Jesus, totally separately. They didn't say it to each other in the morning. He went out and decided to find the local churches, the Iranian church in that town of refugees, went and gave his life to Christ because of the dream. Came home, he was different. She said, what's happened to you? Where were you? And he thought she was going to get angry. He said, well, look, I had a dream. And she just burst out crying, said, I had the exact same dream. And so now, that kind of thing. And in the dream, Jesus basically appears to them, says, trust me, follow me. And that kind of story for people who I've heard that from people who have never, met a Christian, read the Bible. And then sometimes in the dreams, people who've never read the Bible will be quoting the scriptures. So one pastor told me the story of a lady who came up to him and said, I had a dream, and in the dream it says somebody came to me and said, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. What does that mean? And so he turns to the scriptures and pointed out, I mean, just these are things that you cannot explain without the power of God at work.
Yeah, extraordinary. Obviously, it's no small thing necessarily for someone who was formerly Muslim to become a Christian, especially in a place like Iran. So what are some of the consequences that might be there for people who do that? I'm guessing that obviously a number of people who do convert weren't necessarily very devout Muslims. I can imagine there's a kind of nominal Islam that exists to some extent in, as there is nominal Christianity that exists in, quote unquote Christian parts of the West. But what does it make life more dangerous, I suppose, for people who do go that route and become Christians in Iran?
Yeah, so for sure, it's obviously a risk for people in some way or the other. People don't become Christians for social reasons and social mobility, but so there's the risk of persecution in different ways. People can lose their jobs. People can, they can lose their pensions. We know a man who was a teacher for 35 years, was a week away from getting his pension, retiring, and they fired him and he lost his pension because of his Christian faith. These types of things happen, but because the numbers have grown so much, it's now not a matter of just people coming to faith. In fact, I know many people who've been arrested, who've been imprisoned, and so one of them was told, "There's too many of you to jail. We're looking for the leaders." Another who was, and this was very recent, when he was being interrogated, they said, "Look, if you want to be a Christian, be a Christian. But why are you telling other people about your faith? Why are you doing this?" And he actually turned to Matthew 28 in the interrogation room and said, "This is why, because Jesus told us to." But there is a sense now that if people become Christians, if they just keep it to themselves, then they won't be bothered too much. The other interesting thing is in Iran, the persecution comes from the government. In many other Muslim countries, the persecution comes from the community, from the family itself. But because people in Iran are so open to the gospel, you have and this is one of the reasons church is growing, whole families are coming to Christ. Sometimes 20, 30 people in one family come to Christ. And so persecution is not from the sort of grassroots level. It's more from the officials, from the police. And even at times the police will just say, "We're just doing our job." There's a real move in the country towards the Lord, and it's very encouraging.
How worried, though, would you say the regime is in that sense about this growth of Christianity? And is it leading to further persecution, I suppose, or is it something that's sort of being tolerated in some way by the regime?
Yeah, it's absolutely not tolerated, and it is. So they're looking for, and they're constantly arresting people. People can, if they're following some of these ministries that report persecution, they'll see that, and they can also see that on our website as well. But there's every week you're dealing with one issue or the other. So what they don't want, they don't want people to meet together. They don't want the Bible to be distributed. They don't want people to share their faith. And so there are arrests. Leaders are kept in prison for a long time. And essentially they're trying to force anybody who's a Christian outside the country. Their policy is to, if you become a Christian, leave as much as possible. But what's happening in the last few years is there was a time where a lot of Christians who were persecuted left the country. Now most of them are staying in the country. And so that means that you'll have an even bigger sort of core of the church, of the key leaders staying in the country. And that's very hopeful for the church, actually.
And how does ELAM sort of work alongside then, given that obviously you're not based in Iran? What are you doing to sort of try to strengthen and resource churches and leaders and Christians in Iran?
So we do three main things. We train them. So we do training of leaders and lay leaders at different levels. And I said at the beginning that we started with 6. Now there's thousands of people trained at different levels. And it's very, very beautiful to see a whole generation of leaders who are just passionate to serve. But then you equip them with the Bibles, and then we are really working hard to build a culture of discipleship in the church in Iran. So if you really, when you think of Iran, the evangelism part is the easy part in so many ways, because like we've said, people are hearing about it. People know that Christians, that the church is growing, but not only that, it's not just a turning to a different faith. They've heard the stories. One lady who was arrested, by the way, she was in her cell for 3 days, and she was praying and she was wondering what was going to happen. Knock on the door. The guard comes to her and says, "Can I ask you to pray for me?" As she explained the situation, she said, "I've heard that Christian prayer is powerful." A guard in the prison, "I've heard that Christian prayer is powerful. Will you pray for me?" So that kind of thing is happening. So the evangelism part is, in a sense, the easy part. The challenge is discipleship. How do you help people actually follow Christ? And so we are working really hard to make discipleship at the heart of the culture of the church. And so we do one-to-one discipleship. We have a program called Safar, which is spelled Safar, which means journey in Persian. And it's basically designed to help one older Christian know how to disciple a younger Christian one-to-one. And it's just been phenomenal to see thousands of discipleship journeys. And so if people are thinking and listening and they want to pray for the church in Iran, I would say, please pray for these discipleship journeys. This is where the church can really get established, get rooted. And as people are discipled, then they become part of the story. And their own start. So in Iran, what's interesting, in Iran, when somebody comes to faith, we immediately encourage them to play their part in the story of what God is doing. Take them, let them share their faith early on. Let them, serve. Let them all kinds of things that activate them immediately. So please if people are listening and are moved, pray for discipleship. And then the other thing that we're trying to do is, like I said, the government does not want Christians to meet together. So they're doing everything to help to stop people meet. So one of our big projects is to help small groups of Christians meet together. So one-to-one discipleship. So every believer discipled one-to-one, and every believer in a small group. And that's what we're working towards.
I mean, how dangerous is it for a group of Christians to meet together speaking and worshipping in Farsi? I mean, is there always a kind of a threat that they may be betrayed to the regime or whatever if they're doing that?
Yeah, it is a threat. I mean, without question, there's a danger. But the government knows, though, that when Christians meet together, they grow. And so in one sense, we'll say that it's a risk, but it's actually a great risk to be alone in your faith. You cannot, it stunts growth. It's very difficult to grow as an isolated Christian. And we believe the Lord wants to gather people together, the church together, because it's not just about people coming to faith and sort of changing religion. We really believe that it's the church that can demonstrate love, that can serve the poor, that can serve the needy, look after the people who have special needs and disabled, and families that are dealing with really challenging situations. Let the church be the church in the country. That's how you'll actually change the entire culture, is not through politics, not through new policies. It's the church. So we believe that if the church actually gathers together, they can bring great change.
I mean, that's really helpful. What is it about, I suppose, what people discover in this new community, this church, that is lacking in perhaps what does get offered in the culture in Iran? What perhaps is on offer through Islam and through, the sort of the religious institutions, if you like, that are official and are around them? What is it that the church and Christianity offers that they don't find in those places?
Well, first of all, there's the stories that we hear, and from what the people that I know, what attracts them in a small group, number one, is peace. There's so many, they notice the peace that people have. So actually, in the recent war, there were many stories of Christians, in a war situation, families get together. And so Christians got together with their non-Christian families. That's what you would do if your country is being attacked. You get with your family. And on multiple occasions, the question was, how come, what's different about you? Why are you so peaceful? So when people gather together, there is peace. They sense the presence of God in a sense. And then the other thing is there's trust. There's new levels of trust because of what they've been through over the last 45 years. It's actually really sad to see an erosion of trust in the society. And so sometimes where people love each other and they trust each other, they work together, and they just see this, by this, they will know that you're mine if you love one another. So how come you love, are you family? Are you, and it's just, those words of Jesus ring true in the church in Iran. So we really, really do believe that small groups are so vital for the future of the church. So as much as people are encouraged to hear, as they listen to this, about what God is doing, we'd encourage them to pray that not just there would be people who come to faith, but the church, these small groups of people would actually be able to meet together to grow and be light all over the country.
Mm. I mean, one of the interesting things for me, and forgive me for asking questions that are just demonstrating my ignorance of Iran and the culture there, but is, I suppose I could imagine that a lot of people have been raised in a culture which tells them that the West is evil, America, the great Satan, and so on. And you might expect them to associate, therefore, Christianity with the West and with America, and therefore, so does that influence the way the average Iranian thinks about Christian faith, or when they encounter it, do they find something that is evidently not tied to a particular sort of Western ideology or America or anything like that?
No, those are actually really good questions, because it's important to say that most Iranians are actually very fond of the West. And one of the reasons we have so many people, leaving Iran, they're trying to get to the West. And actually, there are multiple different shows on TV, these travel shows that there's I can't remember the guy's name, but my son showed me one the other day. Somebody's traveled to 197 countries. He says Iran was his favorite country. When Americans go, when Westerners go, they're really welcome. They're very, Iran actually had a very positive relationship with, in the world before the revolution took place. And, Iranians, even with Israel, Jews have been in Iran since Bible times. So most Iranians actually don't have a problem with Israel. It's the regime, it's the Islamic regime that has created this. So, it's not viewed as, of course, the regime is connected all politically and all of that, but at the grassroots level, people are very open. And so people shouldn't think that they hate, Brits, they hate Americans. There is history, there's political history, but at a grassroots level, I think there's a lot of openness. If you were Justin, they would welcome you. They'd give you a lovely meal. They'd welcome you into homes. They'd talk with you. They'd ask you questions. And, there's not that kind of hatred on the grassroots level at all.
What's happened, though, given the recent tensions that have emerged, and obviously there have been the bombings of Israel's nuclear facility, of Iran's nuclear facilities, and likewise, Iran and Israel have been exchanging fire and bombs and so on. That's at the time of recording, some of that has sort of calmed down somewhat, but nonetheless, I'm sure when this happens, and this was a major thing that happened quite recently, it must sort of change the dynamic somewhat of what you're doing, of the way that I don't know, yeah, what's it done in terms of the ministry from where you're looking at it?
So, it obviously impacts people's disposition and generally in life. I mean, just war is horrible. It is scary. It is frightening, and you have to deal with it. It's a really complicated one though for Iran, because there were many different emotions that people felt. People have lived under a hardline regime for over 45 years. And so certainly in those first few days of that 12-day intense war, there was a lot of, nobody wanted the war, but there was a lot of hope that maybe this will be the end of the regime. So there was both, it's very, very complex emotions, but there was hope that would change. What that's meant for the work, every time anything like this has happened, it has literally resulted in more people being open to the gospel. So during those days, we actually saw people turning to Christ. We had family members who had heard the gospel maybe 2-3 years ago, but hadn't become Christians, calling, their relatives and saying, "Hey, tell me about your God now." And right as the bombs are falling, people are giving their lives to Jesus. So it complicates things, logistically. It complicates things emotionally. It complicates things just politically, but ultimately actually opens hearts. And so the church can grow in the midst of that. But also, I think it means that the church, for me, it was really encouraging to see so many Christians inside the country rise up, in terms of prayer, in terms of being witnesses, in terms of saying we have a part to play that nobody else can play, and we'll go for it. We're gonna play the part that God has for us.
Hi friends, I recently received this review of the podcast from Laszlo, who wrote, "What a great collection of interviews this is. Great job." And a recent convert also left a review saying, "It's taken me 50 years to find God. Better late than never." If you're enjoying this series and you'd like to help me reach even more people with Thinking Faith, please consider supporting this show. Silver supporters get early access to episodes and bonus content. Gold supporters also get signed books and a monthly catch-up with me. The links to support are with the show notes, or visit justinbrierley.com.
Getting ready to step into your career era? Set yourself apart with Adobe Creative Cloud Pro for students. Hone your skills with apps like Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere Pro, and more, powered with the latest in creative AI. Students save over 55%, so you can build a portfolio you're proud of. Launch your future with Adobe Creative Cloud Pro for students. Visit adobe.com/students to learn more.
I'm Ashley Graham, and as a parent, I know the back-to-school transition can be a lot. When it comes to wellness, Ollie supports me and my family through it all. Kids Multi is big in my house. It supports their immune system, and they love to take it. A win-win for everyone. Shop these products at ollie.com or retailers nationwide. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
We'll return to the final part of my conversation with David Yeghnazar shortly. First, another story from Iran's church. Some of the highlights we've heard today don't change the fact that many people have spent years suffering because of their Christian faith. Magda is someone who, although she's never been arrested or imprisoned for her faith, had a life-changing experience with persecution, ultimately leading her to make an unimaginably heartbreaking decision. She begins by explaining her life growing up in Iran.
I was born and raised in Iran, in a very religious city called Mashhad. Mashhad is in the northeast of Iran, near the border of Afghanistan. And my family were Christian. And, I actually, as I said, I was growing up in a Christian family. My father was pastor of evangelical church in Tehran, the capital of Iran. And then we moved because of the war between Iran and Iraq to Mashhad, and we stayed there. And because of the persecution and lots of pressure on Christian people, very precious for us to be with each other as a family, Book of Acts. That was that was my experience of those days. Family from childhood, they discipled us. My father was pastor of the church. My mother was woman of God. And both of them, we were like 5 brothers and sisters. And they were teaching us and, they were discipling us. So when I was 11, 10, my father was a very good painter. And then he painted a cross, Jesus on cross. And I really love that, that picture. And one day I remember I went to that picture and said, I really love you, Jesus, and want you to submit and dedicate myself and my life to you. And this is, that was like a first point and my highlight of my, faith when I was a child. And then after, I was growing, I decided to follow Jesus. Even when I went to the university, people could understand, I'm very different from them. I'm not like them. Forbidden for all minority, not just Christian, but for Christian, it was more pressure not to speak about their faith. Everybody were asking me, why you are so different? And so I was saying, okay, because maybe I'm Christian, that it makes sense for you. And then we say, oh yes, now we can understand why you are different. Because Christian people, they had a very good reputation between, people. And people were saying, oh, Christian people are very honest. They are not lying and they are very good people. But in the university, my life completely was changed because I met a guy in a university when I was graduating. Man came to me and said to me, I know you are Christian. I know you are from Christian family, and I love Jesus, and I really want to know who is it, because we Muslim people, we love Jesus. He is one of our prophets, and I want to know who is Jesus. And you cannot imagine how I was excited, because I was thinking, in this situation, at least I can share, about my Christian faith. So I introduced him to my father, my family, and then even we started to go to the Christian seminars and Christian conferences that it was based in Tehran. So we were going with each other. And then after 3 months, I was so young, and he said to me, I love you and I love Jesus. And I was thinking, in that age, this is a plan of God for me. Become engaged, and after 3 months we married.
Sadly, Magda's story took a desperately sad turn as she soon discovered a very different side to her new husband. Be aware, there are references to domestic abuse coming up.
We married, and then I realized after our marriage, everything was, it was a big lie. Even he didn't let me to go to see my family. I was so active. He said to me, it's forbidden. You shouldn't go anywhere. I was like isolated at home. Mm-hmm. So, and in that situation, I had a lots of questions about, God. And even, I didn't doubt about my faith, but I was so sad and upset. One day I say, why you married me? Why you, if you don't like, if you didn't like, my Christian faith, or, why you married me? And you say to me, you love Jesus. And he said, because I was thinking and I decided to say that to bring you to the Islam, he was always saying me, you are unclean. Unclean is a word that Muslim people, calls other religious, say they say unclean. You feel when they say this to you, you feel you are dirty. You are nothing. It's a very, very nasty word about, always frightening me, threatening me that he's going to go to the secret police and say about our, because my father, we had like a home church or maybe underground church in our house, cell groups. And he was always, and he knew because he was coming with me before marriage. And he was telling always to me, if I'm going to go to the, government and secret police. And I was always afraid for other people, for my family. At that time, I was so alone. I started to pray to God that God, give me a child, I was praying for having a child but when I was talking with my ex-husband, he was always telling me, you are unclean. I don't want to have a baby from you. Praise the Lord. God heard my prayer and I felt I'm pregnant, expected. And you cannot but imagine from when the moment he knew I am pregnant, he started to make a plan and always was telling me during my pregnancy, because you are unclean, I never let you feed that baby and I will take her or him away from you. I was praying and I knew my time with my baby gonna be very limited. When she born, I have a very, very beautiful daughter. Her name is Kathy. One day he left us and without any money, without any job, nothing. He threw me out and took away my baby. And he was 4 months. She was 4 months, kicked me out and took away my baby, beat me very, very bad. I had bruise and, my teeth broke and I had to go back to my family. And I just asked them to go. I begged them to go and, to bring my daughter. And they went after few hours. They could take my baby and brought it to me. And after that, I stayed with my family and he left us.
For a short period of time, Magda was safe and able to raise her daughter, but immediately faced all kinds of new challenges, including the threat of losing her child.
I was without money and I couldn't find a job because in Iran, women that don't have any rights. If you are married, your husband has to give you permission for finding a job. My family support and my other believers, community Christian, we had very small community, Christian fellowship. And all of them, they were praying, they were bringing some gifts, some little things, and my family, my brothers and sisters, they were very much, were involved and engaged with the pain, But during that 2.5 years that I was staying with my family, because always he was sending me or he was coming and shouting and, shouting on me and my family. And he was sending us threatening messages. And because of, Islamic law was behind of him, and, was supporting him. So, I didn't have even any word or any support because of, these kind of things. And I was talking about Jesus and I was sharing the the story of Bibles and sharing to my little daughter. And I was thinking at that time, I'm putting a little seed. So that was my pleasure. That was my honor. And that was my heaven. He showed me a verdict from the Islamic court. Content of that paper was the court divorced me and took my baby away. You can imagine how I was destroyed. Go to the court and, protest about this. For 1 year, I was fighting for my right. And again and again and again, they approved and they confirmed the very first decision. They said, if you just say to us, you are not a Christian and we will give you back your daughter. I could feel I'm dying. Because on one hand, it was my Christian faith, and the other hand was my daughter, which I really loved her. Yes. And how could I make a decision? In one moment, I could feel a very strong presence of God in the court.
Faced with a desperate choice of denying her faith or losing her daughter, Magda says she felt the presence of God in the courtroom as she gave her answer to the judge.
And I said, no, I'm not going to tell you that things. I am a Christian and I'm sure and I believe, my God, we will give my daughter back to me. And they took my baby away and gave it to him. And I remember I become like the depressed. Yeah, I've got depression. So I couldn't see her. Sometimes I was like, secretly I was going to their house, I was hiding somewhere like behind of trees and, Christianity or our faith is not against of reality or against of humanity because we are made by the hand of God and God knew my limitation. And during all of these pains, I never regret about my decision, but I was so sad from God. I become hopeless as well. I was so upset, even I was angry from God, but I never regret. I can confess with confidence. Praise God. It was God's help. I never regret. I knew that was the right decision.
Despite losing access to her daughter and the pain it brought into her life, Magda says she believes that God began to use her in situations where she was able to channel that maternal love she felt for her baby daughter towards others in need.
A big major earthquake happened in our country, Iran, in the center of Iran. The city, one city completely destroyed, the city of Bam. So I just went there and I went for 10 days and I stayed for 1 year. At that city and that miserable situation, God healed my broken heart. I could meet lots of children who they lost all of their generation. And God was telling me, Magda, you see these children and you can be their mother, their family. You can be their family. And I was thinking, how God knew me. I was full of motherly love. And I wanted to hug the children, feed them, hug them, take them showering or these kind of things. And God knew all of these things and gave me opportunity to do these things for these children. And also I could see lots of women like myself, their child, they lost their child, their family, everything. They lost everything. And I realized how God is shaping me. And again, I could start to worship Him. I could start to pray at that situation. And it wasn't just like prayer. It wasn't like God, give me chance to see my daughter. It was thanksgiving on my mouth and my lips. Thanksgiving again started on my lips. And, it was, God healed in that situation my broken heart.
Today, Magda has found a calling, working to bring a message of hope and good news to other women suffering under the oppressive Islamic regime in Iran.
I'm sure you heard about women in Iran, how much they are under it. They don't have any freedom under the control of Islam. So I have passion for them to talk about my faith and talk about Jesus when they experience and can feel their identity in Christ. This is my pleasure. This is my heart for. Please pray that I can be a messenger for them to share the good news among them, and they can realize how much they are precious and for God.
That was Magda's story. If you listen in full to her interview at the ELAM podcast, Jesus Speaks Farsi, you can also hear a beautiful recent postscript to her journey. She was able just last year to meet and spend time with her daughter Kati for the first time in 21 years, something that Magda says has been a miraculous new stage in her ongoing journey. Again, the links are with today's show. So what does the future look like for the church in Iran? Coming up, the final part of my interview with David Yeghnazar.
Breathe deep. Imagine your legs more limber in Duluth Trading Double Flex Denim. Envision euphorically squatting for that can of suds, bending for your toolbox in a state of bliss. Lunging for your laser level on a whole new level. Relax and allow the flex to fill you with ability. Find your inner flex in Double Flex Denim only at Duluth Trading.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Is Iran a kind of special case in the Middle East when it comes to the way in which Muslim background believers are coming to faith? Do you see this happening elsewhere in the Islamic world?
It seems to be it's very intense what's happening in Iran, but what we see happening in other countries is also quite hopeful. From what I understand, in Afghanistan, there are signs of a lot more openness, particularly since the Taliban came back to power a couple of years ago. The numbers of Afghans turning to Christ in very similar ways, dreams, visions, but also just hearing the gospel, social media, all kinds of things. People, when people have the courage to share, more people are able to sort of overcome that barrier. For many people in the Muslim world, they feel like I'm the only one who's becoming a Christian, and that was the case for some of the Christians in Iran years ago. We have a founder, Reza Roshanzamir, who came to faith in 1968, and he literally thought I'm the only Iranian who's ever become a Christian, Muslim background. And so he would describe it, there was this giant wall, but now the more people understand that Muslims are coming to Christ, it's much less of a barrier for them. So that's an important thing to note. And in Afghanistan, I think there's a move. There are other countries. I just heard in one of the Iranian churches, an Uzbek came to Christ. And there's things happening in North Africa, which are very, you just show that people are somehow encountering the living God and they're turning to him. So it is across the Muslim world, I think there is a move. But what we do believe actually is that and what this is why we say Iran and beyond, because we believe Iran, there's multiple different aspects of the Muslim world, but Iran is really at the heart of so much of what's happened. And when you see a church growing in Iran, it will impact the rest of the Muslim world. And so for us, it's exciting that Iranians can be the natural carriers of the message of the gospel to surrounding countries, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkey, and it's happening. And I think it's going to happen more and more and more.
I mean, it's interesting because even as you were speaking, I was thinking of the fact that there are obviously those who are very concerned about the rise of Islam in the West and concerned about an influx of immigrants and refugees and so on, bringing Islam with them. When I think of it, Iranians, though, I almost exclusively, the Iranians I've come across in the UK have been Christians, in fact. And so it's very interesting that that's a very different dynamic. And in a sense, as Iranians come to the West, they're often bringing Christianity with them, aren't they? And I suppose that's true of other, as they fan out into other parts of the world, the Middle East, etc. They are, as you say, becoming a new form of missionary, coming from a Muslim background very often, but with a unique ability, therefore, to speak to other Muslim background people.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think that's right. What comes to mind as you're speaking there and making that comment is, what we've seen in the church in Iran and what I've learned over these years, whatever challenges there are, the Christians need to see that God is writing the story. What is the story that he's writing? And whether Islam is on the rise or this is happening, you've got immigrants, you've got this or that. So one of the things that we've learned from the church in Iran is, and this is really, really important, this is really at the heart, I think, of what we can learn from the church in Iran, is that whatever challenges have come, whether it's been the martyrdom, whether it's been arrests, the closing down of the Bible Society, we say, Lord, what are you doing? The regime comes, it looks impossible. And so when people look at difficult political situations or even the rise of Islam or, Muslims coming into towns or whatever, what is God doing? And I would just encourage people to say there is an opportunity here that is far greater. Yeah, you can talk about what's right and wrong and, your political views, but there is a story, I believe, for the church to play, to live into, that actually is far greater. There's something that is so much richer. And some of us will it's our part is just to pray and to, pave the way for something new to happen. Like my grandfather prayed all those years ago, and I believe we're seeing the answers to those prayers. But I think there's an opportunity for the church to not feel like it's impossible and we need to wait for the perfect circumstances. So much of unfortunately, I think the church in the West, we've waiting for perfect circumstances in order to do our, what the Lord's called us to do. And I think you don't need to wait. One thing you can learn from the church in Iran is you don't need to wait for perfect circumstances. And in fact, it's in the midst of the mess, in the midst of the confusion, that God works. And you see the types of miracles and stories that we've talked about. And so in communities across Europe, America, I would say, let's change the way we see the situation in terms of saying, Lord, what is the story that you're writing? And these, like you said, they can actually revive churches. We know Iran, we have just engaged with the church in South London, where the majority of people are Iranians. And they sort of brought revival to that little community. That could be a positive thing. But there's another way that, and I'm sure many people have thought about this, but the people who've come from other countries, when they come to faith, they can send the gospel back into the country they've come from in ways that missionaries would have, it would have taken them 20, 30 years to even reach one family. And so we're actually working on a project to help Iranian, any church in the West that has Iranians, to mobilize those Iranians to send the gospel, disciple new believers, even start small groups of Christians, help them meet together and their families or groups of friends. I think it could be an absolutely huge opportunity. There is a huge opportunity for the church to both welcome them, serve them, but then empower them and mobilize them to do, just to take the story even further.
Wonderful. It's so encouraging to hear these stories and to see the way in which God is using Iranians, both in Iran and who are coming to the West, to fulfill, as you say, to write a story that we're kind of seeing unfold before our eyes at the moment. As you mentioned earlier on, I've been quite hopeful of a change in the spiritual atmosphere in the UK, in the West generally. There's more of an openness. I think there's a sense that secularism has led to a lot of dead ends and emptiness, and people are starting to explore the Christian story again. And I just wonder whether, what's happening in Iran actually may be a sign that actually there's this kind of rebirth is happening in lots of different ways in different places. What's your sense of what's happening, both as someone who lives both, if you like, with your heart, both in Iran and in the UK and the West as well, in terms of a kind of hope for a rebirth and so on, David?
Yeah, actually, I'm really glad to be able to talk with you about this. I'd love, I'm sure we could talk for hours, but we heard you recently speaking at Emmaus Road Church, and I think let me put it like this. I've lived here since I was 9. I love the UK. This has been a home for us. And it's interesting for me over the years, seeing the little signs in Iran and now experiencing what's really an incredible, whatever you want to call it, a revival or whatever. I always felt and was waiting for the time we'd see the same signs in the UK. And what you've been talking about, others, the quiet revival, we're definitely seeing similar kinds of openness. And I would really encourage people who are listening that to your podcast. And by the way, Justin, when I didn't tell my wife I was doing the podcast. We were talking about podcasts in general. She said, Justin Brierley's podcast is one of my favorites. She was happy to know I was going to be interviewed here. But the reason is, I really think what you're talking about is really, really important for the UK. And if there's anything about the story of Iran's church, I hope it's an inspiration to the church here to say, what we're seeing is not just, live into the story that you're seeing. Live into this. And don't let the discouragements, and there will be discouragements, stop you. The church in Iran, and we could talk for hours just about the discouragements they face, but there is enough evidence. God is alive. He's doing something. We're going to go for it. And even when there's setbacks, when people are imprisoned, we had 60 of our leaders arrested and imprisoned at one time. Key leaders we had invested for a long time. It looked like everything had gone. That was back in 2010. And yet somehow the Lord has, opened even more. It doesn't stop. And so we've, the stories that we've heard through you and through others, even dreams and visions here. My daughter was baptized 10 days ago, 15 years old. All her friends came to the church. Non-Christians, they were excited to be there. They loved it. These are things that probably wouldn't have happened 3-4 years ago even. And so I just encourage people, listen, pray into it, live into it, and take each one. And one thing I would say about the church in Iran, which we have been really weak at in the UK and in the West in general, is telling testimonies. If the church in Iran is growing, it's one of the reasons is the word of their testimony. Revelation 12:11, they overcame by the blood of the Lamb, the work of Jesus on the cross, and the word of their testimony. They were willing to be witnesses, to witness to what God had done, and they didn't shrink back even from death. They were willing to go all out. So in the UK, there are definitely signs, I believe it with all my heart, very similar kind of indications. There's an openness that it's not easy to explain, but it's going to take the Christians telling their story, telling their testimonies, and not just pastors. One of the things that the one reason the church in Iran has grown is that you couldn't build a church around a celebrity, a key leader. There is no place to bring them. There is no platform. And if you become one, you're certainly going to be dealt with severely. So if you want the church to grow, you've got to empower the whole church to be witnesses, like that lady in the grocery store. Brilliant story. Absolutely normal, actually new Christian. You got to empower it. You say, I want the church to grow, empower it. So the listeners, you guys you have a story to tell. Tell your story. And when there's something in testimonies, I think we'll see that increase, and people will start to talk in society. Well, that happened in Iran, by the way. The government started to say, hey, people are reading this Bible. They would show the New Testament on TV, say, please don't read this Bible, which was brilliant advertising. We couldn't have paid, could have paid millions of pounds for advertising campaign, wouldn't have been as effective. So as we tell the testimony, others will start talking about the testimonies, maybe against it, but it will make people even more curious.
It's such something that I'll take away from this interview is that insight, actually, that one of the reasons the church has grown is almost because they couldn't put leaders on pedestals, because those people are going to be cut down as soon as they raise their heads. But in a funny way, that has enabled normal everyday believers to go out. And I wonder whether in the West that's one of the lessons we need to learn. We sometimes still, idolize almost the leaders, and that actually has the effect sometimes of making ordinary people in the pews feel like, well, that's their job, it's not mine to tell people about Jesus.
I actually think that is really, really fundamental here. And I've thought about this, I've talked with a few friends in the UK about this. I think it's really vital. If you have this openness, and there is an openness, there's no question about it. We've seen it, you've talked about it. The structures of the church and how to mobilize the whole church. Because the Lord works through his people, and everybody should feel empowered to tell the church actually feels like it needs to be emboldened to share their faith, not wait for a Sunday where somebody might hear a great testimony or a great message on the gospel. It's out in the grocery store, it's out in neighborhoods, and and being willing to open their mouth. Can I tell you one more story that would so there's this guy, we call them Ali and Mariam. They were, and they're just totally ordinary Christians, came to faith actually online. Somebody discipled them online using Safar. And they were living, and they ended up in a small house church. They were living in a city in Iran, and they were in an apartment. They had to renew their lease. Price went up. They couldn't afford it. They ended up having to move. They were really disappointed. They had to move 45 minutes across town to a less desirable place, and they were going to be, far away from their small group. And they were really confused. They were like, Lord, what is going on? They were just enjoying the fellowship, growing in their faith. So the leader just said, well, pray, see what God has for you. And really simple things. In this new situation, what does God have? So they go to this apartment. They're not happy about it. They even had to borrow money to pay a deposit. And so anyway, after a few weeks being there, it's an apartment building with about 10 apartments. And about 4 or 5 weeks in, they have a sort of building wide in the yard, a barbecue for people to have time together. So Ali's there, and they're meeting the neighbors, they're eating. While he's eating his chicken kebab, somebody shouts out across loudly in front of everybody, hey, what's different about you two? And he's about to choke on his chicken, he's just, he feels the blood draining from his face. Looks up, he sees every eye on him waiting for the answer. Guy says, there's something different about you two. You're not the same as the rest of us. And he absolutely doesn't want to say anything, but he feels the Spirit whisper to him, say it. Say it. And so he gulps and he says, well, we've met Jesus Christ and he's changed our lives. Gives a brief, explanation. And then that finishes. And they go back upstairs and he locks the door, puts the chain on and everything. And they look at each other and his wife's thinking, have you made the biggest mistake? Are we going to be in trouble? 11 o'clock at night, there's a knock at the door. And they look at each other afraid. And he opens the door just ajar and he sees a neighbor. And the neighbor says to him, hey, you said you met Jesus and I've been wondering. And so he comes in. 2 o'clock in the morning, that neighbor gives his life to Christ. The next day, another neighbor comes and knocks on the door. He thinks he's the first. He's not the first. He gives his life to Christ. A couple of days later, and they're in the living room of another family. The whole family's sitting around listening to them tell their testimony. Within 2 weeks, at least one person from every apartment gave their life to Christ. And the point is, sometimes God is preparing the environment, but we have to speak. And it's not just on a Sunday at church with the key leaders. I believe, honestly, Justin, if this quiet revival is going to happen, if the church in the UK can work out how to empower Christians to open their mouths and speak, tell their testimonies, I've met Jesus. The reality is, and listeners will know, how many churches in the UK actually help their members know how to share their faith. That's something we do in Iran all the time. It's like, you're a Christian. This is just basic. Write down a list of people, pray for them, tell them you've met Jesus. What do you do? I would imagine most churches haven't even thought about training their members, teaching them, just showing them, how do you actually open your mouth and share your faith? And we would do that with every member of a house church. This is what you do. And that's through the discipleship. So I believe that if we're going to see this actually, the environment is prepared. The apartment buildings are full of people who are interested. They've said, I'd like to know more, but you got to open your mouth.
Yeah, this is the time to speak up, to tell people the story again. Thank you so much, David. It's been an absolute encouragement to me hearing what's happening. A challenge as well. Whenever I hear of people risking it all for the sake of their faith, it really convicts me about what am I willing to do actually in the safety and comfort of, the privilege we have of worshipping in freedom, to actually go and do the same as they're doing, tell their friends and neighbors about Jesus. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for the encouragement and the challenge it brings to Christians all over the world, including here in the West, to go and do likewise. And bless you as you continue the work of ELAM. Where can people find out more about your work?
So they can find out more at elam.com. Very simple website. And also I'd really encourage, if there are any listeners that have Iranians in their churches, we'd love to help them. And there's a page on our website, elam.com/send-hope. We have an initiative called Send Hope Back Home. Any church that has even one Iranian, we believe, is part of this story. And we'd love to help you know how to work with the Iranians in your church, disciple them, and also mobilize them to send hope back home to Iran. So we've got this initiative, Send Hope Back Home, for any church that has Iranians in them. But yeah, elam.com, they can learn more.
Thank you so much. God bless you, David, and God bless ELAM.
Thank you, Justin.
I usually sign off saying, I hope you've enjoyed today's show. I don't know if that's quite the right word, but I do hope you've been as challenged and inspired by the conversation and stories today as I have been. My original intention was just to record with David Yeghnazar and use some elements of our conversation in the documentary episode on Islam last week. But once we'd actually sat down to record the interview, I just immediately knew I had to put it out in its entirety. It's such an extraordinary rebirth that's happening in Iran right now. Do again go and check out the work of ELAM at elam.com. That's ELAM.com. Thanks again for listening today, and please do share this episode with others who you think could benefit from it as well. Posting it to your social media makes a big difference to this show reaching others, and of course leaving a rating and a review on your podcast provider also helps people to discover us. And if you'd like to read this podcast, well, it's a book too. I'll send you chapter 1 for free of The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God when you subscribe to my newsletter. And I'll also send the first chapter of my new book, Why I'm Still a Christian, as well. The links to the newsletter with today's show. And thanks to Kay, Nathan, Tim, Gareth, Luke and Andrew, people who have started supporting my work recently. It does make a huge difference to me. We've got an exciting new show in the works at the moment, and I really can't do it without your help. So please do consider becoming a monthly supporter. Silver supporters get early access to these episodes as well as bonus content, and gold supporters also get signed copies of both of my books and a monthly catch-up call with me if you'd like it. Again, the links are with the show notes. Coming up next time.
Did the Lord ever tell you the meaning of the starry arrow?
Not yet. It's in me all the time. The thing for me for a while was, should I talk about it? And what I did feel that God said to me was, I gave you 18 months during lockdown. That was just for you. He says, what I gave you was a whisper. You now have to shed on the rooftops.
Well, I was delighted to co-host a new podcast stage at the UK's Big Church Festival this past summer. And next time you'll be hearing some of the surprising conversations we had in front of a live audience, including a returning friend of the show, mythologist and storyteller Martin Shaw. But you don't have to wait. You can listen to it right now when you support. As I've mentioned, do get on board if you can. The links are with the show info. The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God is a production of Think Faith in partnership with Genexus and the Jerusalem Trust. Editing assistance by Isaac Simmons. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
Leading a business today means constantly adapting. On the Executive Insights podcast, brought to you by AWS, global leaders share how they're making tough calls, testing bold ideas, and putting innovation into practice, generative AI included. If you're looking for real stories behind what's working, this is it. Subscribe to the Executive Insights podcast today, available now on all major podcast platforms.
Don't be left in the dark. Find out about our latest shows, upcoming events, and recent articles by subscribing to my Think Faith newsletter. It'll arrive once a fortnight, and I'll even send you the first chapters of both my books, Why I'm Still a Christian and The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, for free when you sign up. And if you want to support this show, you'll get early access to episodes and bonus content when you become a silver supporter. Gold level supporters also get signed copies of both those books and the chance for a monthly catch-up with me. Your support makes a huge difference. The links for the newsletter or to support are with the show info, or go to justinbrierley.com.